I'm Jason Grissom, and I am on the Faculty in Leadership Policy and Organizations, and I am the Director of the Education Policy MPP program. Where are the MPP students? Monique just asked about the HEA folks. Okay, great. So we'll be talking later today. One of the things that we wanted to do as part of this session was give you a little bit of a sense of some of what the faculty work on here that you might be interested in. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes of a talk about my work, or a particular aspect of my work. So I study sort of the intersection between school leadership and policy. And a particular angle on my work, I'm interested in issues of race and ethnicity for school leaders and teachers, and how that differentially impacts outcomes for different kinds of kids. And some of that work in particular has been in the area of gifted services. All right, so that's the part I'm going to talk to you about today, some of my work on underrepresentation in gifted programs. So let me just tell you a little bit about the motivation. So the motivation for why we're interested in this topic is that we've known for a long time that students of color are underrepresented in gifted services in schools relative to their numbers in the population, and they're substantially underrepresented. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of numbers here, but you can see African American students are 17% of the average student body, okay, in a public school in the United States. But they're only 10% of the gifted population in those schools. All right, and you can see the disparity for Hispanic kids is very similar. All right, and so we've known this for a long time. We've observed this pattern in the data for a long time, but we have some hypotheses about why you get this gap. All right, and that's and some of those hypotheses haven't been tested directly, and so we're going to try to bring a little data to bear on why we might get these gaps. All right, so why? What are those hypotheses? What are the reasons that we might hypothesize that those gaps exist? All right, so to understand that, the first thing you have to understand is how kids get assigned to gifted programs. All right, some of you were probably in these programs when you were in school, in elementary school or middle school. Typically think of it as a three-step process. Okay, the first step is you have to be referred for testing. Okay, so there's going to be a referral stage where someone is going to suggest this kid might be gifted. Maybe we need to test this kid. Then they're going to go and they're going to be evaluated. They're going to go through some formal battery of tests, and that's going to vary from place to place what that battery of tests might look like. And then there's going to be a placement process based on the results of those those diagnostics that those kids go through, which might be there might be some kinds of ability or achievement tests, but there might be other pieces of that. Some school districts use other factors like creativity or leadership or other measures of talent. But a committee might look at that battery of outcomes and decide whether or not the student actually gets placed into gifted services. All right. So you think of the process as looking like that. Well, now that gives you some sense of different places that the disparities might show up. All right, so let's look at a couple of those. All right, so one hypothesis that people sometimes suggest is that, yeah, we see disparities in the assignment of kids to gifted programs, but we also know that kids from different socioeconomic and racial ethnic backgrounds show up to kindergarten, right, already having some kind of achievement differences, right? So one hypothesis would be, well, maybe when we see these gaps in gifted assignment, those are just reflecting differences in the preparation of students that maybe they even enter the public school system with by race and ethnicity. All right, well, we're gonna examine that in just a second. Another hypothesis is there might be differences in social capital. So maybe the families of kids, all right, have different understandings of ways that school processes work. All right, so maybe parents from different families might be differentially likely to say, I recognize there's a gifted assignment process at the school and I want my kid to participate. All right, that's another possible hypothesis. A third one is what we might think of as the gatekeeping function. All right, the gatekeeping function to referral refers to the fact that in almost every system, teachers serve as a kind of gatekeeper. All right, a lot of you were probably public school teachers. Some of you were probably elementary public school teachers. Some of you may have referred kids to gifted services. That's typically how it starts, is that some teacher has to say, I think this kid might be gifted and we need to send this kid through this testing and evaluation process. All right, so that could be a place where the disparity shows up. All right, and I'm going to show you a little evidence on that in just a second. All right, but recognizing it could also show up at the other stages. All right, we worry a lot about potential biases in the standardized assessments. If there are cultural biases in the assessment, then there could be ways that the disparity shows up at the testing and evaluation stage. It could also show up in the review by committee stage, all right, when the placement decision happens. If there are biases among the adults that are making those decisions at the placement stage, that could be another place that the disparity rears its head, all right? Now, in my work, I'm especially interested in this part. I'm especially interested in the referral stage, all right? My sort of working hypothesis is while we need to worry about the potential for disparities the later parts of this process, I think we really need to worry about what kids are getting to take the placement tests, all right? And so that's what we're going to focus on. And in particular, I'm interested in this gatekeeping function, all right? If all of this process relies on a classroom teacher to send a kid for testing, then we need to worry a lot about the biases in educators and their abilities to be able to recognize giftedness in different populations of kids, all right? All right, so how are we going to look at this? Well, we're going to use data from a nationally representative sample of kids called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study. This is a really rich data set. It followed about 21,000 kids who entered kindergarten in the 1998-99 school year, and it followed them all the way through 8th grade, collecting information from those kids, from their parents, from their teachers, from their schools at intervals, okay, throughout the time span of the study. We got lots of information, all right? And in particular, we have achievement tests that were collected by the researchers at each one of those waves. The schools never saw those, but researchers tested those kids in math, in reading, and some other topics. And so then we can use those data to look statistically at the factors that might predict gifted assignment, all right? And in particular, we can make comparisons between Asian, white, black, Hispanic kids with the same achievement scores. All right, so we can look at kids who have the exact same achievement scores and see what is their probability of being assigned to gifted services. All right. So here's descriptively in the data, just showing you that those gaps exist. Those gaps that we see nationally in other data sources also are replicated in the ECLS data. All right, so this is the proportion of students that are assigned to gifted in kindergarten, 1st grade, and 3rd grade, and it's broken down by race and ethnicity. And what you can see is that even for kids that are assigned in kindergarten, already there are gaps between white and Asian students and black and Hispanic students in kindergarten, and the gaps only get bigger. By the time we get to 3rd grade, you can see the bars for white and Asian kids are substantially higher. So then the question is, well, why do we get these gaps? Empirically, what can we say with the data about why these gaps show up? Well, the first thing that we are going to discover in these data is that students of color go to different kinds of schools, and in particular, black students go to public schools that look different from the schools that kids from other racial and ethnic groups attend. With respect to giftedness. So more than 90% of white, Hispanic, and Asian kids attend an elementary school that has a gifted program, whereas only 83% of black students attend an elementary school that has a gifted program. Well, that already starts to point right to a systemic problem. If there are not the opportunities to go into a gifted program within the elementary school, well, that should suggest institutionally that you've got a problem, right? That could be a place that we see differences in receipt of services. There's nowhere for identified kids to go. The second one that's really important, a really important conclusion that we reach with these data, is that achievement differences do help substantially explain the gifted assignment gap between Hispanic and white students, but they don't explain the even larger black-white gap. And what I mean by that is that if we compare a black student and a white student with the exact same achievement scores, all right, the probability that the white student is assigned to gifted programs is 6.2%. The probability that the black student is assigned is only half that large, all right? So what you could think about this as the thought experiment is take two very high achieving kids, all right? And those kids are, we can even put them in similar kinds of schools. We can give them similar kinds of other background characteristics. So statistically, we can fix things like poverty, health, the kind of peers the student has, the kinds of school environments they're in, et cetera. And we still see these big, big differences, even for two kids that are very high achieving. All right, there's something going wrong with the system. All right, there's some reason why high-achieving kids of color are not being directed into gifted services at the same rate as their high-achieving white peers. All right, and so here's the third big conclusion that comes out of this research, and that's that the race of the student's classroom teacher appears to matter quite a bit. All right, so in particular, black students are less likely to be assigned to gifted services when their classroom teacher is white. All right. So this is pointing to that gatekeeping function that I was talking about before. So this is showing you what on the x-axis we've got average test scores, and they're expressed in standard deviation units. So a 0 test score is actually the mean. Okay, the average achievement of kids is over here on your far left. All right, and as you move that way on the x-axis, you're getting higher and higher achieving kids. All right, that's how you interpret that. The y-axis is the predicted gifted assignment. Okay, the likelihood that you show up in gifted services the next year. Okay, and then there's 4 different lines here. All right, so the triangle line is white students with a non-white teacher, and the square line are white students with white teachers. And what you can see is that those lines are really close together. In fact, statistically, they're the same. And that for white students, the probability, okay, these are white students with similar characteristics on all of these other dimensions that I was talking about before. Their probability of being assigned to gifted services appears not to be a function of the race of the classroom teacher that they have in a given elementary grade. All right. The lines with the circles, those are black students who have black teachers, and you can see that their line is really close to the other 2. All right. In other words, for black students who have black teachers, conditional on these other characteristics, their probability of receiving gifted services is very similar to the probability for white students. The big difference comes with the diamond line down at the bottom. Those are black students with non-black teachers, and in these data, that's almost all white teachers. All right. That black students with white teachers are systematically, even as we move, you can see, even as they get very, very high achieving, as we move out to the far side of the x-axis there, they're trailing further and further behind in their probability of being assigned to gifted services. All right, that's a big problem. So, in some follow-up work that we've done, we've looked at what explains the connection between what we might refer to as race congruence or race matching and the probability of gifted assignment. And when you look at teacher perceptual data, because this survey program asks teachers a lot of questions about the individual kids, what we see is that teachers are more likely to rate factors like approaches to learning, socio-emotional capabilities, and so forth higher when they race match with those kids, all right? Which suggests that what's possibly going on here is that teachers have different expectations of kids that are correlated with the racial and ethnic match between the teacher and the student, and that might be affecting the referral probability, right? That speaks to the gatekeeping function. What's very likely going on here is that the reason you're getting this gap is there are lots of kids that are just they never get the chance to take the test because the teacher never thought that there was the potential for giftedness or the likelihood of giftedness in that kid. So in some follow-up work, where this is from some working analysis that we're doing right now, we see that socioeconomic status matters a lot too. Okay, we control for socioeconomic status in the analysis I was just showing you before, but we also, when we look specifically at different categories of income and parental education and so forth, we see these big gradients in every racial group that kids who are what's labeled SES Q1, those are kids that are the lowest income. SES Q5, those are kids that are in the top 20% of socioeconomic status. And you can see that what we find is that even conditional on achievement scores and all of these other factors, wealthier kids are also a lot more likely than low-income kids to be assigned to gifted services. Okay, so what do we do about this? All right, I'm pointing out a problem, I'm suggesting what some potential solutions might be, but what can we do? All right, because that's the, for a lot of the faculty who are, at Peabody, who are thinking about these important policy relevant educational issues, we're trying to figure out, okay, point out a problem, but then what are the solutions? Well, the first thing you have to do is recognize it's a problem. I think a lot of school districts around the country may have some general sense that there are gaps, but they don't have a good sense of the magnitude of their gaps in their own data. They may not be paying attention to that. So you have to recognize that it's a problem. And the second thing you have to realize is there actually are good solutions out there. There are solutions like universal screening. Okay, if I'm telling you that this is really a gatekeeping problem, that the problem is with who gets referred to testing, well then why rely on referrals? You could just screen every kid. You could give every kid a gifted screener, okay? And if I'm right, then when you give every kid the universal screener, you should see big reductions in the gap for assignment for different kinds of kids. And in fact, we've seen a few large urban districts who've experimented with universal screening, and they've seen big reductions in the gap across different SES, racial ethnic groups, in who's assigned to gifted services. The problem with universal screening is it's kind of expensive, right? So if you're going to screen every kid, now you've got to go out and purchase a universal screening instrument, all right? And and school districts have other priorities and so forth. But if you're really serious about this as a problem, those solutions exist, and you just got to get serious serious about the problem and serious about tenable solutions that you can use to address them. All right, so I'll be around for a good chunk of the day at lunch and so forth. If you have questions about this, or you want to talk about it, or you want to shoot me an email, I'm jason.grissom@vanderbilt.edu. I'm happy to correspond about this in the future if you're interested. Thank you.